everybody. Nice to meet you. My name is Mary Stimson, and I'm excited to be representing here today. I'm from Southwest Airlines, and I would love to talk today about creativity in data science and what it means to use data science as an art form, and of course, whether or not that's possible. So before we do that, I would love to just hear from you guys in the chat, where you're from, what kind of work do you do, just so that we can hopefully make this kind of a conversation more than anything. Please interrupt me with questions, add things to the Q&A, and we can have a nice conversation. So I'm looking forward to it. So the question here being, is data science an art form? Let's start first with I can just introduce myself. I am a data analyst at Southwest Airlines. My background is actually in accounting. I got my degree in accounting. I'm also a student at Dallas Theological Seminary, getting a degree in theology. My previous work experience was in brand planning and advertising and in ministry. So as you can hear, my background is not particularly in data science, which I think is kind of funny because it's true of a lot of us. So a couple of quick things. I have flown on 26 free flights on Southwest over the last 18 months. My team is a lot of fun. As you can tell, Southwest, or you may have heard, Southwest has a very fun-loving culture. We are kind of known on my team for having Nerf battles and eating a lot of candy. But one of my favorite things about my team is that we brag, whether it's true or not, about having the most musicians on a team per capita in the company. And the reason that I bring that up is because as we're talking about creativity in data science, I think it's really important to recognize that a lot of us come from different backgrounds in data science. It's kind of unique to our industry. And a lot of us come from sort of those right-brained kind of industries, whether that's music just as a hobby or the arts or liberal arts, that kind of thing. I love that about data science, that we have a lot of people from different sides of the world. So if we have the most musicians per capita, oops, am I not sharing my screen? Sorry. There we go. It also shows us that we have some different kinds of brains going on. And in fact, I like to say that we're a lot of math nerds with right brains on my team. So again, as I have a lot of experience outside of data science, that's what I do now. So I want to talk a little bit about how I got here, but more so focus on where I'm going and where I hope that we can go as an industry. So today I work for Southwest as a big data analyst. That's the title. I do a lot of SQL and Python, kind of your typical things. I'm pulling data, making hypotheses with them, running models and simulations in Python usually, and then trying to spit out information to our internal customers. A lot of what I work in is financial planning and analytics. So one thing that I want to point out that's kind of interesting is that as a data analyst, of course, I work with data scientists who are a little more of the stats AI guys and ladies. I don't use a lot of AI. My team doesn't use a lot of AI for, my pod in finance doesn't use a lot of AI. And the reason being that, as you may know, finance groups don't always love using AI because it's not explainable to investors. And so that's something I find interesting about data science is we have to adapt to our users, and you all know that. Another thing that I do that I would love to talk about if you have any questions is I'm a data application developer. So I use a lot of React and Linux, and if you're familiar with Python, a lot of Dash and Plotly, Flask, to push what our forecasts or our models are suggesting into a more visual interface, and not just like a dashboard, but also something that users can interact with to run their own what if scenarios and publish and load scenarios, so that we always have sort of a record, a source of truth of what was predicted at that time. So with data applications, I'm building something that's interactive for our users to really get into the model and understand it and jump into it more than just accepting it as answers. And you'll hear me say this a few times, that I think that data science should always provide information and not answers for smart humans to interpret. So enough about that. The question today is, can data science produce art? And so I'll talk a little bit about where I come into that, but I really want to talk about just that top level question. And this is on everybody's minds right now, especially as we've seen public open source AI tools just catapult. What does that mean for our world? What does that mean for the arts? So one thing I'll talk about right now is this is a really high level dashboard that I made for my brother. My brother is a musician. He is in the US, but he has a lot of commercials going on right now outside of the US for songwriting stuff. And so one thing that's hard to track is because everybody uses different platforms in different countries, Spotify, Melon, different tools like that, Shazam. This is good. Sorry, I'm seeing things in the chat. You graduated in law. That's very cool. See, we have people from all different industries. Sorry. But because he has people from different platforms interested in his music, I kind of brought that together, made just a synthesis of those tools, and I'm trying to show him on a dashboard, hey, here's what your music is being successful in across the world. You can't see it here, but there's also tools like how many beats per minute is usually successful for your music, what kind of, he writes in a lot of different genres. Which of those genres is usually the most successful for you, Johnny, my brother, as he's working across the industry and trying to understand what can be the most useful for him. The same thing applies for labels. They're using a lot of data to decide who to pick up, right? And sometimes it's not even what music do they like, it's just, what do we want to do next? So with trend analysis, musicians can choose where to tour next, like my brother. Songwriters can think about things like genre, and labels can decide who is maybe going to be most successful. And that doesn't even always have to do with taste. And so the question is, if it's data-driven, sometimes even entirely data-driven, the decisions that we make, is it really culture? Is it really culture anymore? But again, as I said, there's a lot of musicians in data science. Some of you will know that music itself is sort of an algorithm a lot of the time. There's a lot of rules that then we break, but this is called the circle of fifths, and it's a way to sometimes use math to understand where music should go to have a satisfying sound. And so not only is music in itself an algorithm, but it also makes it easy, somewhat easy for AI tools to pick up on that algorithm and write cool music. And so my brother is concerned right now that you can put in his Spotify link and try to generate music in his style, right? We see that with visual artists as well. It's really becoming a big question. What is being mimicked with data science of actual human art? So the question again becomes, if it's computer generated, is it really art? So I'll give the simplest possible answer to this, may very well be wrong, but it's my perspective. And that is, to both of those questions, the answer is yes. If culture can be defined as manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively, and art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, then yes, both of these things are manifestations of human intellectual achievement and of human creative skill and imagination, not because the AI generates them, but because people made the AI or the data science model, whatever it may be. So data science models can create art, not because they themselves might be the artist, but because there's always an artist behind the curtain. There's always a data scientist, a developer behind the curtain. I'll pause right here for a couple questions, see those coming in. Angelica, I see that you asked about what IDEs do I work with most. I always use Jupyter for an IDE. My go-to deployment tool at work, we're using a lot of AWS. I personally really enjoy the Google Cloud Console for personal projects like this one. And that dashboard that I showed is in Google Data Studio, which for some of those that I'm seeing who may not be data science professionals, that's a great tool to use for free to get familiar with things like Tableau, Power BI, very, very similar. So let's jump in to Creativity and Data Science 101. I wish this was an actual course that I could take, but instead you're stuck with me. So my biggest advice for if you're wanting to be creative in data science, and if you want to foster an environment of creativity, if you're a leader in data science, is to do weird things. Do things that have nothing to do with work. Encourage your people to do things that have nothing to do with work, even if those are on work hours. So we'll talk about what the dog computer meant to me, but I want to point out one thing before we start, is that what I'm going to show you, it's not really a data science project, it's really more analytics. It's not so much a commercial product, it's really not at all, but it is three things that I hope it turns out to be. And I hope it's useful, I hope it's novel, hasn't really been done before, and I hope it's not obvious. And you might recognize those. I see we have somebody who graduated in law. You might recognize those as the three characteristics that are required for a patent. You'll see I have a patent pending. That's not important. What I'm trying to say is that sometimes those three characteristics are what prove something to be innovative. And so when we're thinking about innovation in data science, which is the topic for today and tomorrow, I would encourage you to think about those things, whether something is useful, novel, and not obvious. is going to be something that always helps us make a framework for how we think about possible projects going forward. Do something weird. That's my suggestion for creativity and data science. So what you're about to hear is something kind of weird. So the first thing that I did, and is usually the breeding ground for innovation, is I found a need. And this need was kind of funny. There was this thing, you might have seen it, trends on social media or just in the news, that people, sometimes speech language pathologists, were applying the tools that they used with a nonverbal or differently verbal human to animals. So for example, sometimes we'll see a nonverbal human that has a board of buttons, and they can press, a need or just any sort of communication on that board or with eye tracking to tell out loud what they're thinking, or on paper what they're thinking and what they have to communicate. And so some of those opportunities might be applicable to other species, right? And so this one speech language pathologist on the left here, her dog is named Stella, started putting out a board of buttons to see what her dog might be able to communicate. And these buttons have a little recording in them so that the dog can press it and it'll say, play, outside, whatever that might be. And so this dog went pretty far, and then some other organizations started saying, well, what if we did it in these kinds of layouts? And then this dog is Bunny. Bunny probably has another 33% increase in the number of buttons she has now. That's a lot of things to say. And so what I was seeing online, and Angelica, I can see that you've seen these on TikTok and Instagram as well. What I was seeing online was a lot of anecdotal evidence. One of these dogs started talking about its dreams, its thoughts, and I was very skeptical. And I know, like most of us, there's a professional skepticism that comes in data science that I think is a lovely thing. So what I wanted to do, what the question that I had was, is any of this real? Because it seems like you could maybe just get an animal to press a button and say that it's doing something. But I wanted to test it for myself, and I wanted to gather some data behind what may or may not be real. So how to join creativity and data science? The first is to encourage curiosity, whether that's in your own life or in that of your team. When I started this project, it was during COVID, and it was during a lot of my work hours. And my team knew that. They knew that it was my own intellectual property, but that we didn't have a lot going on at work because of COVID. And so I learned how to do a lot of things and a lot of programming and a lot of other skills because I was encouraged by my leaders just to pursue this as an interest and as something that they knew could develop me as a professional as well. So encourage curiosity on your teams or as an individual. Observe your world, whether it's your industry or outside of your industry. Be an observer, because there's always something. If it sparks your curiosity, then it's going to be useful. Ask a lot of questions like, is this real? And think outside your domain. So that's what we'll talk about now. Before I touched any data analytics, I had to learn a little bit about programming. This is, again, when I didn't have really any experience with that, I realized if I want to do this, I need to learn some programming, and I just bit off way more than I could chew. But I also needed to learn some other things. I learned woodworking. I learned soldering very poorly. I learned to use tools like the Raspberry Pi to make these buttons light up. The first time this button lit up, I was over the moon. I thought I had gone to the moon. And so I learned things that were outside of my domain, and they were outside of data science as well, right? This is not data science work at this point, but I had to learn these kinds of things. In my team, we have had to do woodworking to build, sawing things to build structures in the airport that we could use for computer vision, right? So there's always something outside of data science to be done. And so we have to be curious about those things and thinking about outside our domain. And as it says here, usually we have to start with very non-data sciencey things, right? And with that, I want to say that there's no such thing as a data science problem, right? At my job, we have fuel efficiency problems. We have passenger scanning problems. We have all sorts of different questions, but they're not data science questions until we bring that in. But there's no such thing really even as a math problem. There's just world problems that can be addressed with math. Think about other things outside of data science. If you're a leader, ask people what they're reading, ask people what they're doing outside of work. Those are the fun things, and that's what makes people stretch their brains. The next thing is to succeed and fail fast. I wanted to make a board like other people, but I wanted to track data. And so very quickly I had this thing, which was great. It worked for the most part, but it was also it provided this live dashboard of what was being pressed, things like that. But at the same time, excuse me, a lot of times it did not work. Sometimes it would misfire, and I heard the word so many times in the middle of the night. It would say, help, 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 in a robot voice. And so this thing was great. It was also a success and a failure at the same time. So I made something new, even if it was bad, and I was having fun, right? Even when projects aren't that fun, like fuel efficiency, they might not, other people might not think they're fun. If your team is curious, it will always be fun. And so I had a boss once who would say creativity sometimes requires a drill sergeant. And so sometimes we have to do things that don't look like fun on paper, but they really are fun because we're curious people. That's why we're in our industry. So then I learned a lot of more things, learned 3D printing, I learned some different kinds of circuitry so that I could build different versions. And this was kind of the final version that I landed on. It's about 8 feet long, had space for about 72 buttons, I think. I think we got up to about 20 at this point. And it was just different and it worked. So a couple of examples of how it worked. I'll show you these videos briefly because I know I want to leave time for questions. But for example, in this video, my friend is, my dog, Honey Butter, is being a little bit too all over her, being affectionate. And so I tell her to leave it. So my friend says, love you, which usually means scratches. My dog gets a little clingy and I say, hey, okay, that's all, I'll leave it. And Honey Butter presses the that's all button. She's pressed that's all. And so she comes over and then she's just much more gentle, right? She's learned something. Very, very fun. So I'll skip the next video, but she starts to put together more abstract terms that I just didn't know that a dog could do. And so what I'm observing is things that, unless you had some really complicated language processing things, I'm observing context that really only a person can observe. So as we're starting a project, we have to think like a human to understand non-data science problems. So think like a human. My friend says computers are dumb, people are smart. The next thing is to do the math. There's a lot of data science that happens then. This whole conference is about that. You guys will figure it out. That's not what this conversation is about. So you got it. Besides, we'll all be on Stack Overflow anyway. So I will say math and data science in general is what separates us from magic, right? It's really cool what we get to do. And a lot of times that really does just come down to what we're doing in our IDEs, right? So the final thing that we do is we think like a human again. This is when we tell stories. This is sometimes when we build a data application. And I'll say it again, data science provides information and not answers to real people. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if our model is awesome or not. Whatever it's spitting out has to be interpreted by a person and sometimes even overridden by a person intuition wise. And so humans are smart, computers can be dumb. So we think like a human again and we tell stories. So in the end, data science, or excuse me, the dog computer was meaningful in that, yes, it, for me personally, on a sample size of 1, it validated my hypothesis. But it now has led to many more. There are a lot of people now doing projects like this, whether it's DIY or there's a company that's kind of coming out with something similar. We have a lot more analytics going on in this field now. But what I want to point out, and what's important to me, that whether we as individuals know or we as teams or leaders know, is that a project does not have to be groundbreaking to break some ground. Actually, you never have to use it for it to break some ground. But for me, this was a great professional experience, and it did impact the industry that I was interested in. So a project doesn't have to be groundbreaking to break some ground. So here's some parting thoughts. Encourage curiosity, succeed and fail fast, think like a human, do some math, and think like a human again, right? In this slide, which we'll share, I have a couple of, excuse me, allergies, tools that are interesting to me. Sorry, especially if you're newer to this, Raspberry Pi changed my life. So keep these things in mind as we're parting. So remember, data science is creative because data scientists are creative. So is data science an art form? Depends on how you approach it. So thank you for listening. I think we're almost up on time, so I will take questions or thoughts now. I really appreciate you guys joining. Hopefully this is a good reminder that we do a lot more than what we sometimes give ourselves credit for. Eric, I see you are trying to influence your organization to bring data science into the possibilities without the luxury of robust support. I completely get that. I think we've had to, my team has kind of had to bring in the cutting edge of things like data applications. It's not always the most popular in our industry. So I think the best that you can do is just make a thing in your free time at work. And if you're a leader, by the way, lead people free time at work so that they can do what they need to do. But yeah, I would just say in your free time at work, build something and then prove that it's awesome. That's, I think, the best way to pick things up like that. What else? Yes, another very fun fan of the Raspberry Pi. Definitely very influential. Interesting. I see this question. Have I ever used high-level schools of philosophy to frame a design challenge in a more human-related way? Yes, human-centered design, I think is what you're asking about. Kind of that high level of design beyond not only in the way we tell stories, but also in the way we approach a problem in a human-related way. Definitely, that's something that we're using. We have another team that is specifically human-centered design that we work with. So again, if you're building a data science team or you're working with that, find people who have experience in human-centered design. It's so critical. Animal-centered design was what was really part of this project for me, right? It was thinking how an animal thinks. So yes, definitely high-level schools of philosophy. And in a funny way, I'm a theology student, and I think sometimes that forces me to think a lot about philosophy and how humans work. And so whether it's just what you're reading, what you're interested in, anything like that, it can be useful to think more about people than anything else. As a leader, are there any guidelines that you recommend putting around creative projects? I mean, I would say as long as it's allowed, let them do it. No, I think my team was supportive of me doing this project, and it had nothing to do with anything. As long as they're learning, as long as they're interested, I would really encourage them. My team tries to do an 80-20 rule where instead of being 100% packed with work, we try to be 80% packed so that the other 20% can be used for mental margin for personal training and also for innovation projects. So I think the 80-20 rule has been really, really useful. But yeah, I would say let people go where their creativity leads them. The most creative project Southwest has done that addressed a data science problem. That's a great question. The most creative project, honestly, I think a lot of what we're doing is really creative. One of my favorites has been just questions that we haven't necessarily put into play yet, but how to know where bins are full and where bags are going in bins. For example, how many purses are being brought on the plane, and does that mean our bins are full? Probably not. But if we have a lot of suitcases being brought on a plane, then our bins may be full, and trying to also put in hardware to know, but where are our bins full, so that we can tell people and board people on planes more quickly based on what kind of bags are being brought on the plane. I always thought that one was kind of interesting. Hopefully I explained that well. Southwest does have remote data science roles. I personally, Angelica, thank you for flying Southwest. I like to say what the flight attendants say: we know you have many options when you fly, so thank you for choosing Southwest Air. Yes, Southwest does have remote data science roles. My team is hybrid, but we have a huge IT department that has data science roles that is always hiring. So if you're curious, Grant, reach out to me. Anything else? Loving these questions. This is really fun. Okay, well, I better let y'all go to your next one, but this has been so fun. Thank you for joining. I really appreciated it. And if you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn or email, anything like that. Would love to chat. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing, but feel free to reach out. I appreciated it.